Hello, my name is Melissa Treinkman. I'm thrilled to be here today to chat with Michael Maliakel. You can read more about him in Volume 81, Issue 1 of the Vocal Point column in the Journal of Singing. That's the September-October 2024 issue. Before we started the recording, you were telling me a little bit about your night last night. So, can you fill our viewers in on what that was all about?
I'm currently playing Aladdin in Disney's Aladdin on Broadway, and the show just this week is celebrating a massive milestone of 10 years on Broadway, which is a big achievement, especially in this business where shows open and close all the time. I think there are 14 shows in Broadway history that have made it past the 10-year mark. So it's a big accomplishment. They had a special private performance of the show for just returning company members and all the people that have built the show over the last 10 years. And it was just a epic, wild energy in the house. We had like cameos from original cast members on stage and added ensemble members and dancers during the big Friend Like Me tap dance section. It's been a very exciting week for the show to kind of like breathe new energy into a show that's, been around for 3,500 plus performances now. I've been in the role for the last 2.5 years. I just crossed my 800 performance mark at the show, which is something I can't really wrap my head around, but it's been a real gift and yeah, very exciting time here in Agrabah.
I love that. 10 years ago, you won the National Musical Theater Competition sponsored by the National Association of Teachers of Singing.
I was pretty much fresh out of school, and it was a moment in my career where I was just sort of figuring out like what path was right for me, where I fit in, where my heart lies. The competition and the feedback I got from it really helped sort of steer my career in a direction that has led me to where I am right now. And so I'm really grateful for everything that put into motion. And it's been amazing because that when I did it, the competition was, still very, very new, and they were just sort of getting the word out and figuring out what it would look like. And I had the opportunity to go back this past year to the final round of the competition and to see how it's grown and expanded into this really beautiful thing with really great exposure, and the talent is phenomenal. It's really, really exciting to see how far it's come. And yeah, it's a lovely little group of winners that the competition has gathered over the last 10 years. I'm just happy to be a part of it.
And on a personal note, my student was Barry Harris, who won the competition this
Oh my
past
gosh, he
January.
was excellent. So phenomenal. Just like
Thank
beautiful programming. So, I mean, obviously, technically, the voice was amazing, but just such a confident performer. She was phenomenal.
Tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to this amazing career in the performing arts.
I've been singing since I was a little kid. I grew up singing in the church choir and taking piano lessons. Started all that around probably 7 or 8. Kudos to my mom for finding that one thing that would make my super energetic self sit down and accomplish something. And so that eventually led me to the American Boy Choir School, which sadly is no longer around, but in Princeton, New Jersey, which was a foundational musical, but just life-changing experience for me that I credit, most of my musicianship today to those 4 years when I was just a kid. I was a choir kid through and through all of high school into college. I started doing theater really as a way to hang out with all of my choir friends more in high school. And senior year, I ended up being Sky Masterson and Guys and Dolls, which was so fun. I didn't really know that I wanted to pursue this for a career just because I didn't see a lot of people that look like me doing it. And I was a little, hesitant to imagine myself paying my bills doing this. So I ended up going to college originally just as a general liberal arts major. I went to Georgetown for a couple of years. And while I was there, I did a singing competition and met a voice teacher at the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins. And, I was doing all the choirs and a cappella groups and theater shows and things at Georgetown. And it sort of became clear to me in my 2 years there that I had this real passion for performing, and that if I didn't give it a go, I would really regret it. And so I took a big risk, and I left Georgetown, transferred to Peabody to study with Stanley Cornett at Peabody, and I'm really grateful I did. It was an incredible experience. He's an incredible technician that really built my voice. I moved to New York after graduating and started doing a lot of professional choral singing just because it was my happy place and very familiar. A lot of church work, early music, sort of got into that network in New York, which is an incredible scene here in the city. The choral music is top notch, and that was really fun to get to freelance and pay my bills and meet like-minded artists here in the city and have a network. While I was doing all that, I started auditioning for musical theater because it was always something I was passionate about, and ended up booking my first big gig was on the Phantom of the Opera tour, which I did for a year, the last year, which closed right before the pandemic, actually. And that sort of got things started for me. I got an agent, and of course, the world shut down for the pandemic. But one of my first auditions after the pandemic started to wind down was for Aladdin on Broadway. And so that sort of gotten me to where I am today.
That must have been a very, life-affirming experience right after the pandemic and
Oh
not
man.
knowing whether your career was going to survive
Absolutely.
to
We were all in this position of considering alternatives because we just didn't know if, whenever things might come back, and then for a few months later to then find myself in rehearsals with, a Tony Award winning choreographer director 𝘰𝘶𝘶𝘯𝘨𝘪 teaching me how to tap dance like for my Broadway debut in a leading role. It was just when I think back on it, I'm amazed that I survived it all just because it was so overwhelming and extraordinary.
Was your training at Peabody mainly classical, would you say?
Yeah, my voice teacher Stan Cornett is very much like a bel canto technician, and it was in the studio we were really only working on art song, oratorio, and some sort of baby baritone arias. I was trained as a lyric baritone, and I think technically those foundational building blocks are useful for whatever genre of singing you end up finding yourself in. I was still on the side just for myself singing musical theater repertoire. I've always loved the crooners and the golden age, and Frank Sinatra and Bobby Darin and Andy Williams. All those guys were big heroes of mine. So I would just do all of that for fun on the side. So I think I sort of maintained like a little repertoire for myself just to understand like the stylistic requirements to sing that kind of music. So I think that's what made the transition into more theater style singing pretty fluid for me. But I think ultimately, in this career that I find myself in now, 8 shows a week, it's if your technique isn't in place, you're not going to survive an 8 show week, especially one where you're singing a lot while you're dancing, and you're at the edge of your breath to begin with. So if you're not in control of your mechanism and your support system, it's a losing game. So I rely on that foundational bel canto technique, even if I'm singing a more quote unquote poppy score like Alan Menken's score for Aladdin. It's all related to me, I think. I think sometimes I remember this is all changing, I think, in the last probably decade or so. I remember when I was at conservatory, I was a little bit of the odd duck that was, interested in musical theater. It was very much everyone was sort of gunning towards that sort of traditional opera career. And there was a little bit of a stigma towards theater singing as sort of the lesser of the styles. And I think people are sort of coming around to realizing that that's not at all the case. In the same way that there are opera singers that don't sing with great technique, there are musical theater singers that don't sing with great technique, but the people that are at the top of their game in either field are masters of what they do. And it is absolutely a feat of talent and preparation and technique that goes into either art form. So I think people are sort of starting to come to realize that, like, oh, it's especially as more and more opera companies are adding theater shows into their seasons and requiring musical theater pieces in their aria packages now, people are realizing like, oh, it's hard to be good at either. And it requires a lifetime of dedication to, understanding style and vocabulary and repertoire. Musical theater actors have to be able to sing pop rock. They have to be able to sing jazzy styles, have to be able to sing more contemporary musical theater styles. And then they also have to be able to sing those legit things. Legit is what we would call more classical style singing. So you have to, if you want to work, you have to be able to do all of it. Obviously, like we all have our specialties and things that we're sort of known for, but you have to be so versatile. And the singers that I admire the most are the ones that are versatile.
That's inspiring. And I imagine there might be someone watching this or reading the article who is majoring in classical music or opera in college and looks to you like, wow, actually, it's possible. I think there's a lot of singers majoring in opera who have a secret love for musical theater and maybe would want to
Yeah,
be able to
absolutely. I
cross
mean,
over.
I think my experience was probably similar to a lot of kids that find themselves in opera school, which is that when you're in high school or even in middle school, like no one's doing operas. You're starting out doing musicals, right? And so I think we've all most of the people that I knew in opera school like did their high school musicals, and so it's a format and idiom that's familiar. It's just you sort of move on past it, or a teacher steers you in a certain direction, or you fall in love with a composer or whatever it may be. It's always something that I wish people wouldn't completely let go, because you never know what path your career might take. Just leaving your options open, especially in a business like this as performers, where the opportunities are so few and there's so many phenomenally talented people. I think, especially when you're in your early education, like I think keeping your options open is the name of the game. It was for me, for sure.
On your Instagram bio, it says very prominently, representation matters. So I wanted to ask you about that because I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, representation. It's something that means a lot to, I think, anyone who feels like they have to really dream hard to imagine themselves in any scenario that they don't see themselves represented in. And I think that's true, of course, for performers, but it's for anything. I think about my friends with disabilities. I think about my friends with, gender non-conforming identities, people who just don't see themselves represented in career paths that they aspire to. It's so hard to imagine yourself to be that one person that's doing the thing that you want to do. There are so many obstacles and burdens to overcome to become, say, an actor on Broadway, that one added thing on top of that is that to think that that might be something about who you are as a person, what you look like, what you bring to the table, it can be really overwhelming. I know personally in my career, if I had seen people that looked like me succeeding in this industry, it would have, I think, fast-tracked, at least like inspired me to believe in myself and to put more of my eggs in that proverbial basket and be like, you know what, that guy's doing it. There's no reason why you can't. Work hard, focus your attention on that, and it could happen for you. But I think for so long I was afraid. I was like, I don't see people like me doing this. So maybe it's just not something that people like me are meant to do. And maybe it's something that I wouldn't be successful in just as a result of what I look like, who I am. And so I think these things are all starting to change, thank God. And I think we have a long way to go. But I think, in my position now as Aladdin on Broadway, I've been able to interact with a lot of kids at the stage door here who are studying music, studying theater, who are studying economics, who are just like so excited to see someone that looks like them doing this and succeeding, and just feeling it does so much to allow these folks to feel welcomed into our theater, into the storytelling, to know that they belong here as well, just as much as anyone else. And I think, it's a slow progress for sure, but I think we're making little baby steps, and I'm really inspired to see what the next 10 years might look like in my field for sure. It only makes sense that the worlds that we create on stage should look like the world that we live in. I walk out of our stage door into Times Square, and it could not be a more beautifully diverse little few blocks of the world. And I think it makes total sense to me that our stages should look like that too.
And it must be so gratifying to know that you are now the one who's inspiring that next generation who's looking at you and saying, I really think I can do it. Mom, hey, look at him. That could be me, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me it makes me kind of emotional just because it feels like a big responsibility. And I hope so. I hope so. I mean, so much of this is just the day-to-day of warming up and staying healthy and going through your lines and being present with your scene partners on stage. And then every now and then you'll meet eyes with a little girl in a Jasmine costume in the audience and realize how important what you're doing is.
Speaking of getting emotional, I did see an interview and it kind of brought tears to my eyes when you were describing it, but describing your opening night of Aladdin with your mom in the audience while you were singing the song
Yeah.
Proud of Your Boy. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the stage musical of Aladdin, it was the whole concept behind it was to bring back the original storyboards and plot line from the animated film that were left on the cutting room floor. One of those plot lines was around Aladdin's mother who has passed away. And so he sings this song that was written for the animated film but didn't make it into the film called Proud of Your Boy. So there are a couple of reprises that sort of find him at different points in the show as he's growing into the person that his mom hoped he would be, that he wants to be for his mom, for the memory of his mom. And it's this beautiful song that I have loved for years and years before I ever thought that I might be able to play this role. And so on opening night, when I joined the company, I had my mom in the audience, both my parents, and it was a surreal moment on so many levels to be able to come back to performing after the pandemic for sure, to be making my Broadway debut in this big flashy Broadway show in the title role, and then to be singing this song about making your mom proud with her about 20 feet away from you in a crowd of 2,000 people. It was a completely mind-blowing experience. In the moment, I had a lot of responsibility to just carry the show that night. And so I didn't really let myself go there too far. But in about a month or two into the run, she came back with a big group of family and friends from home. And in that moment, it all sort of washed over me, just knowing how supportive and encouraging she was. My parents immigrated from India, and they didn't really know much about the arts at all, but they were so open-minded and supportive of identifying that, oh, this kid really loves this and this is something that he's really passionate about. And not knowing anything about what a career in the arts might look like. I didn't see my first Broadway show until I was well into high school. I didn't know that this was even a career that people got paid to do until I was a young adult. And so just to know that they were so supportive and, pinching pennies to like find the funds for my earliest voice lessons and piano lessons, and making time in their busy schedules, working full time to drive us to choir practices and play rehearsals. Where would we be without support systems like that? So yeah, I'm so grateful.
I wanted to ask you about voice types and what you consider your voice type to be, and whether that's different in the classical sphere compared to musical theater world.
Yeah, voice types, especially in the Broadway scene in 2024, is a very interesting conversation. I studied as a lyric baritone. My voice is like a medium low voice, I would say. And as I've, you know, built my career a little bit more focused in the Broadway scene, I've learned that no one's really writing for that voice type anymore. I'm excited about someday doing like a big meaty revival of a Rodgers and Hammerstein show, or Lerner and Lowe or something like that, where the glory days of the baritone was really celebrated. Sweeney Todd is my number one dream role.
Oh, I could see you doing
Yeah.
that. All
In
right.
a decade or so, yeah, I'm
Yes.
looking forward to hopefully doing that someday. But the reality is the scene, especially in the new musicals that are coming into the scene here, are very much like pop influenced. And so every like 10 years or so, the tessitura just rises like a minor third, it seems like. So the girls are having to belt higher, the boys are having to belt higher. And so it's a tough thing for low voices, I will say. And we have all, I sort of market myself as a bari tenor now, which I've learned how to navigate that passaggio and really kind of just bring a little bit less of the weight from my lower voice into the top of the staff, just to be a little bit more versatile. It started to feel a lot more comfortable for sure. And I remember early on, I was not quite sure how to work with it. I didn't really have a teacher that was guiding me through it, but I do work with someone now, Mike Ruckles here in the city, who is a wonderful technician, works with a bunch of Broadway stars, and he's been really helpful in finding ease through that top part of my range, which, that's sort of as a baritone, if right now you're sort of expected to have like a pretty solid G, A flat, just because most scores are going to ask you to do that. You may not sit there for the whole show, but certainly being comfortable, at least touching that is important. I hope it doesn't go much further because I mean, like, how high can people sing? And honestly, I will say that I'm really excited about being part of developing new shows because you can help inspire composers to realize that an F in my voice is going to sound very different from an F in like a light high tenor's voice in terms of the energy that you're trying to evoke through a character's moment. And that's ultimately the goal, right? Like a high note is meant to support a certain emotional moment in the show, in a song, and whatever it may be. I think higher isn't always better. Higher doesn't always mean more exciting. Sometimes it actually means that you lose a lot of the expression, a lot of the nuance, a lot of the color. And so I hope we don't continue to see these things just rise into the stratosphere because at some point the vocal damage is just going to
Yeah.
be too much.
I feel like this is a public service announcement on your part. So many singers are going to be like, "Thank you." Maybe you should make a TED talk that's geared toward, up and coming composers and,
Oh man.
shift the tide a little
No,
bit
I
for us.
I've been lucky to do a bunch of master classes with kids that are in school right now. In the social media era, especially where things are all reduced to these 30-second snippets on Reels and TikTok and whatnot. It's always these high notes that get the attention. But I think people forget that songs are usually around 3 minutes long, and if the high note is 10 seconds out of that 3 minute song and the rest of it is boring and uninteresting and colorless and vapid and flat, like, I'm sorry, are we supposed to sit through all of that and then just be excited about your high note?
I bet you give a great masterclass.
I do really enjoy it. I don't claim to be like a technician. I would never call myself a voice teacher, but in like coaching situations and master classes, I have a really, really good time. I'm not very far removed from being in that environment, and I really do feel firmly that there are a lot of things that I'm not good at still, and I feel like I'm going to be a learner for the rest of my life. I feel like any good performer is a learner.
Do you have any words of wisdom, speaking of that, for the next generation?
I would say for young people hoping to get into this business, you have so much access with YouTube and things like Broadway HD that streams all these recorded things. Even going if you're in New York, to be able to go to the Lincoln Center archives and watch basically any Broadway show you want. I have learned so much from just watching performers that I admire. There's no shame in borrowing little tricks and tips that the singers that you love, the performers that you love do, and adding them to your toolkit. We all do it. And it's, if anything, a beautiful homage to the people that you admire, to your heroes. It's also important to just like stay well rounded and enjoy things outside of performing because all of that comes into who you are as a person, which ultimately is what you're trying to sell as a performer. I think it's really important to also remember to just be nice. I
Hmm.
think, more than anything, it's a collaborative art field where we can't do this alone. We're working with other people. If people don't want to work with you, if they don't want to be around you, and especially in high pressure situations like a rehearsal period or, a high stakes performance, then, that's gonna follow you and it's gonna be put a damper on the opportunities that come your way.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It has been just an honor and a privilege to get to talk with you today and learn from you and hear about your experiences.
Melissa, thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for having me.